if you want to admire anything about me or MECCA, it would have to be my optimism in the face of the many mistakes I make, that we make.
Hello and welcome to an episode of Meijor League, the podcast for aspiring entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Don Meij, and our guest today is the incredible Jo Horgan, the founder of MECCA. MECCA is an Australian beauty retailer founded by Jo in 1997 in Melbourne, Victoria, and now employs over 7,000 employees. Jo is currently the co-founder with her husband, Peter, and her passion and journey are awe-inspiring. Jo was kind enough to invite us to the MECCA headquarters in Richmond, Melbourne, to record this episode.
Such a pleasure. I'm so thrilled that we get the chance to do this. Thank you so much for coming to the office on a Saturday. Appreciate it.
Well, it's very inspiring walking around here. I wish everybody could get a chance, if you're an entrepreneur, to see this place. It's amazing.
Do you know what? I believe natural light and a bit of creativity and some good, pithy slogans in your eye all the time are a good mix for a good start to a good day.
Maybe we can sprinkle this conversation with some of those as we go along.
Fingers crossed.
Okay, but Jo, take us right back to the beginning of the journey, because a lot of people are really keen to understand how you got to here.
Okay, beginning of the journey. Born in England, 14 moved to Australia, swept up in a parents' middle-aged adventure, started at the northern tip of Queensland, ended up in Perth, Western Australia, finished school, did an arts degree, went to the States and did a Master of Science in Mass Communications, and then went to London to work for L'Oreal. After 2 years, came back to Australia, another 18 months at L'Oreal, at which point I felt that why not try and totally revolutionize the way customers get to interact with beauty with one tiny little store.
And where was that little
brands.
store?
That little store was in Toorak Road in South Yarra, which was really off the beaten track because it was not Chapel Street, which was where everything was happening back then. But I was unable to get any landlord to take me seriously and to give me a location. In fact, it was very difficult to get anyone to take me seriously, from the brands that I took on board to the bank managers who wouldn't lend us the money, through to landlords who wouldn't give us the locations. So it was what you'd call compromise city at the beginning. So, tied it together with sellotape and string.
And did it work? The very first retail store?
Did the very first retail store work? I would say in pure economic terms, no, it did not. The first year was very cold and lonely. We opened that first store and did about $600,000, which might seem like a lot, but in sort of retail terms for a store, it's not. We then, 2 months in, did George's, which was a lifestyle store, which was enormous, and we were a concession within that. And that closed after a year, 1 month, and 1 day. And that was between 60 and 70% of our business. So staring down the barrel of failure, 15 months in was really pretty confronting. What did work, whilst we only did $5,000 in our first week, whilst we celebrated a $5,000 Saturday sort of 4 months in, we recognized that customers did love the concept, that there was something in the kernel of the idea that was working. So that felt fantastic. The relationships with the brands was flourishing. So that was good. And it was an iterative process of understanding what was working and what wasn't. But in terms of, could I give it a big gold star or even a tick within that first year? No, I could not.
And so what kept you going? Because a lot of people could quit.
Do you know what? I had an unwavering belief that there was a better way for beauty to be presented to what at that point was vastly female audience. I felt it was quite paternalistic. I felt that it needed to be much more empowering, much more fun, and that we needed to put the customer in control of the whole experience. And so that, my unwavering belief in the customer and that the customer would come and would embrace it and would adopt it, and that it was worthwhile, kept me going. And once you've started something, you just can't walk away. What you can and must do, I found, was you have to just pivot, change, absorb, go again, do differently. And that's, I think, the challenge. And it's also exhilarating to do that. So that's probably why I didn't give up, because I was very clear on the purpose, had absolute belief that it would work and that it just needed new and different ways to go about it.
I mean, there's so much magic in what you're saying there, because I think for some people when they're starting out, they have this pure idea, and when that pure idea is shaky, that's the reason to quit, instead of, no, what have we learned? What have we learned? What have we learned? And really moving quickly to evolve and change from all the learning, because that's all the investment you're putting in.
And I totally agree with you. I feel that so few businesses succeed anyway, from startup through to really established, that if you want to keep it absolutely rigid and pure, I think the odds go down again. I think just stepping in, you've got to be in it to win it. And then once you're in it, you've got to be willing to totally adapt, change, pivot. And even when you talk about the big businesses that have started up, the unicorns people talk about, the amount of pivots that are celebrated, I think it's the only way. And whether it's incremental change or whether it's wholesale change, I think being in it gives you a chance to at least do that with concrete information. Because I'm a big believer, information is power. And I was like, okay, be vastly journalistic, like private investigator journalistic prior, get all the information that you can get to help set you up for success. And then you are literally in a living lab. MECCA's signature line brand is now called the Living Lab of Beauty. That's sort of our catch cry, because it came from those incredibly early days where it's like, observe every last thing that's happening, analyze the data, think it through deeply, and then forecast forward what would happen if you do this versus this versus this. I always say that being an entrepreneur is a bit like playing chess, and you do as much as playing chess in reverse, going back and saying, if I'd made that move 5 moves ago, what would have happened? That and that and that and that. And I find that incredibly helpful.
So what happened next from the store one and then pulling out of George's because it closed? What was next?
Just to give you a sense, we woke up to the news that George's had gone into voluntary administration, and there was a new sheriff in town who was coming in to try and save it in whichever way they could. And it's amazing, again, back to being incredibly practical. It's like, okay, so the very first thing we need to do is lawyers to make sure that we own the stock, that we can go in within 3 hours with a letter that states that we own the stock, so that we can get in front of them first, so that we can negotiate, that we can now change the way in which payments are made so that we get the cash directly, so that we're not caught up in any further shenanigans and the only thing that we've got going for us. And it goes on and on and on and on. But it gives you enormous confidence that if you just approach any problem that comes your way, logically and methodically, it is solvable. And so what happened post those first 2 stores, it was Scrabble Street for about the next 4 or 5 years. The first 5-6 years were incredibly hard. Our accountant sat us down at a coffee shop, because we didn't have an office, 4 years in, and literally said, some businesses just aren't meant to make it. Pregnant pause, meaning this is one of them, and you need to come to the dawning realization yourself. At which point I just went, I do not accept that. we will find a way. And everything had gone against us because not only did 70% of our revenue go poof like that, and we then negotiated with David Jones and put 2 locations, one in Melbourne and one in Sydney. And then one in Melbourne we had to put up in a month. Because when we closed George's, and I'm slightly going all over the place here, when we closed George's, we basically said to the team who are on the shop floor, I'd just signed our first office, the lease on our first office. And I said to them, there's no job being a makeup artist, but if you want to come and set up a mini warehouse and a mini office for a month whilst we try and work this out, then you still have roles. Every single one of them did that. And I still have photographs of us literally taking the secondhand shelves from Wangaratta and building them ourselves for that second, as that second store had closed, as we were negotiating David Jones, we opened that within a month. And we just incrementally opened one store after another. And after about 5 years, I think we had about 6, maybe 8 stores. And it was the first year that we actually broke even. And we began...
You were funding it all yourself all the way through.
And and that is one of the things I think for entrepreneurs, they often talk to me about what should they do. And I get that within tech, you have to move super fast and it's just not possible to fund it yourself. I'm a huge believer in the joy of if you can keep a company private, it gives you enormous leeway to make counterintuitive decisions all the way through. And you can take such a long-term lens in your decision making. And I think about Jeff Bezos, who talks about Amazon, which I get is not private, but he seems to run it, or he used to run it sort of with very clearly not listening to the market. It was like, I have a 7-year strategy because everybody else is thinking 3 to 4 years because that's how long CEOs usually last and that's how long a strategy, your strategic pathway is. And so with MECCA, we really can think 25 years ahead. We were just talking about Jim Collins and the fact that we went to see him a couple of years ago. And we did talk about where do we want to be in 25 years' time. And that's only possible, I think, as a private company. And there have been inflection points. We've talked about the very difficult first years. A couple of other things happened. The GFC, as you know, the global financial crisis. Every other retailer just ripped cost out of their business. And it started with the people on the shop floor. And we actually went, there will be an end to this. And we are just going to double down on experience and put more and more team members on the shop floor so customers going through tough times can come in and really feel that human connection. It made no sense. But as a private company, we were able to do that. Same thing during COVID. That was another real inflection
And you probably
point.
took share doing that too, because you were unique. Everybody else was compromising, saving themselves rich, and you were in a growth mode. And even I think people working in the environment are positive versus when they're in a save mode. Everyone's sort of got to turn up and go, do I even have a job next week and put my best face on? Whereas you're investing in people.
And it feels authentic, I think, for customers when you do that. And I think COVID was another real example where we took enormous share in the market. Jim Collins talks about it, and he talks about luck. Everybody gets good and everybody gets bad luck. And everybody that went through COVID, that was bad luck. But it's what you do with it that matters. And there was an opportunity for us then, again, to double down. And we invested enormously. The first thing we did during COVID is, and money comes into this all the time, right? Because as a startup, you count every single dollar you have and you understand it's ingrained in you forever that cash flow is king and queen rolled into one.
And reserves.
Well,
for
so
the bad
we went
times,
to the bank and basically got the most eye-wateringly enormous loan of
and during
all
COVID.
time. We were the first business that went to the NAB. They told us that it's our bank. And we worked over the entire weekend. We had them working with us at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night so that we could get it signed off on the Monday so that we could come in and we could say to everybody, we have now done the analysis. that if we have to be closed for 2 years, if we have to have everybody on, if we have to pay every single landlord, and if we only do 15% of the sales, we will still be here in 2 years' time. So now let's go in completely the opposite direction and let's lean in and do anything and everything to keep customer, team, and brands
Incredible. You're going
happy
to
and
pay
engaged.
people regardless.
We did everything.
Yeah.
And it
Amazing.
was,
And as you said, that's what you can do when you've got that private mentality. You know, you can make those choices, make those big decisions.
And I'll be clear, JobKeeper helped enormously,
Yep.
Because we were then able to say to people, work from home, and we had people's iPhones, customers ringing in and doing consults with people, on their iPhone. It was real scrappy startup mentality stuff. And there are times, again, I think that being an actual startup and being an entrepreneur, that mentality never leaves you and it puts you in such good stead.
So those 5 original years probably literally wired you now for life. Because 5 years when you're in the coalface and you're grinding, it wires you, right? And then other people who join the organization when it's a success don't understand some of that DNA of why you think, why is she like that? Why are they like that?
I think that having those 5 years, as hard as it was an absolute gift because it gives me a facial tick every time we use a courier because literally I used to post plans to the architect because I wouldn't courier them because a courier was $30 and postage was $2. And so, you think about every dollar and you think about where you want it to go. And, we want everything to be customer facing so that we have the money to pour into these incredible stores and to these amazing team members. We spend so much of our turnover on education and engagement of team because that's what we believe in. But you do that going, oh, right, we have to make sure that we're being judicious in other areas. So yes.
And the evolution. So when did you were MECCA Cosmetica originally? These little, I remember the first one I ever saw was in James Street in Brisbane.
I think this comes back to this idea of you have to adapt and change. And I've got what's called my little happy box of things that I've kept along the way. And one of the things that I had stuck up next to me at the very beginning was adapt or die. Charles Darwin, Darwinian theory. It's useful even today for all of us. And I think being willing to confront the brutal facts. So we had MECCA Manicure. That didn't work. Close it. We had Kit, the store, which was my personal favorite. It was like my third child. I beyond loved it.
Which is a brand you have today.
We've morphed it into a brand of product, which is amazing. But at the time, it was a retail concept that I loved and it wasn't working. So we had to flip that. And then there are other stories. MECCA Cosmetica was a jewel of a store. It was incredibly beautiful. It was very quiet and refined, and it was 100 square meters, and it was so manageable. It's all very lovely. And we realized that, yes, customers were loving it, but it was a subsection of the market, and actually that the broader market that was there, the younger market that was there, they had the same voracious appetite for beauty, but we weren't serving it correctly. And so it's like, if you're going to be customer centric, then you better put your money where your mouth is and do it. And so we then we tried with Kit, that wasn't right. So then we launched MECCA Maxima, which went off like an absolute rocket. And it was then having the courage to say, so we have something that's really working, but actually if you take MECCA Cosmetica and MECCA Maxima and you smash them together and you just get MECCA, then that's probably an even better customer experience because you're not making a customer go between the two concepts in the same street or shopping center or wherever it is. So, but that was a big risk as well.
But in some cases, you've kept them all open. Like in Brisbane, you've got all three, right? You can walk to all three almost.
Well, we are moving over time to MECCA because that's the other thing. Yeah. We're not going to sort of just change everything overnight with the vast expense that's involved in that versus being able to, every time you open a new store, you make it a MECCA, for example, and over time you realize that the MECCA Maximas will evolve out of the business. But I think the point about this is we have had to be willing to, one, confront the brutal facts about things that don't work, even when we're truly emotionally attached to them. Two, even where something's working, if there's something better that's a possibility, you have to take the risk. And even now, we're opening the biggest beauty store in the world. And we have said, we don't do vanity projects at MECCA. We don't. We don't have the appetite for that. Everything has to work. And so why are we doing that in Victoria, Melbourne, Victoria, in Australia with 25 million people? It's because we think we can expand the definition of beauty. We can add so many services. We can do this, we can do that. And based on our learnings, we can try it. Because the other thing, we do have another mantra, which is, we don't want to die wondering. It's like, how far can we go with this?
But go back, the first time you did a MECCA Maxima.
Yes, 2010.
The rent. How do you sign it? And how long is a lease on a property like that? Is it a 5-year lease? Is it a 7-year lease, 10-year lease? I mean, these are multi-million dollar rental. How do you have the courage to go from the Cosmetica to a nightclub that could be in London?
Yeah, we did actually call MECCA Maxima the Boom Boom nightclubs of beauty. Do you know what? Again, I think it's this mix between logical incrementalism and being bold and brave. It's logical incrementalism on its own is not going to get you there. And being bold and brave, you're just taking too many crapshoots, one after the other, and too many of them will blow up. But if you can take all the learnings that you have had and then take a leap that isn't going to break the bank. And that's another thing. When we do take these really risky moves, we're like, will this kill the company? And if it won't, then we basically go, we're all in. And we have all of these philosophies around failing, because I think if you don't fail, you're not trying hard enough. You're not trying enough. It's those sorts of learnings that are really practical learnings that you can apply that I think make such a difference to how you go about testing and trying things. And I'll give you an example. And I'm not sure I've answered your question, actually. So first of all, let me answer your question. How does it feel to go from a MECCA Cosmetica through to a MECCA Maxima, which
was in Melbourne as well,
bigger.
a big one in Melbourne?
Yes, it was much bigger. Do you know what? Having landlords who come on the journey with you and share the vision with you is really important. And with that very first MECCA Maxima, we had a pre-existing relationship with that landlord, and Jack, who's still with that landlord today, and she's so amazing. And she got MECCA, and she became an absolute champion of it. And every year, actually, there are two people, as Jack and Peter, and they get MECCA gifts to this day as the godparents of MECCA Maxima, because they took the risk of actually giving us a really high-profile location. And the first year didn't work. The first year was a disaster again.
Sleepless nights?
Do you know, it's not sleepless nights from the worry. It's like, it's just that feeling of like, how quickly can we make the changes necessary to make it work? And I think we've learned so much since then, because fast forward 14 years and with the biggest beauty store in the world, we are basically making sure that anything that we can test and trial first, we are doing so. And when you put it all together, God only knows what's going to happen. But
you
at
won't die
least we
wondering.
know, exactly, we won't die wondering, but at least we know that each area we have tested and trialed somewhere else in some capacity first.
So Jo, let's just try and picture all of this. So how many stores do we have today? What are the stores? And then what's about to happen next?
Okay. So fast forward 27 years, drum roll. we've gone from that one tiny store to we now have 115. The majority now are MECCAs. We have 20 Cosmeticas. We have 20 Maximas. By the end of next year, there'll be no Maximas left. They'll all have moved to MECCAs. The bigger point, I think, is the overall square meterage, because we went from that first store with 78 square meters to, do you know what? I'm going to have to guess it, but I'm going to say 40 to 50,000 square meters of space now. And to put it in a different perspective, for the first 10 years, the average size of our stores were 100 square meters. Now, and we had, I don't know, 8 to 10. Now, we've got 115. The average square meter is 450 square meters. We have a store in Sydney that's 1,600 square meters. We're opening the Melbourne store with 4,000 square meters. And
hard to believe that you can experience that much cosmetics in that kind of space.
Don,
It sounds
I am here
incredible.
to tell you, hand on heart, you absolutely can.
Wow,
because
4,000
now
square meters.
It's colour cosmetics, it's skincare, it's body care, it's hair care, it's fragrance. We're moving into health and wellness. There's services because, you know, not only do you have makeup artistry, but you've got skin services, but you've got 30-minute skin shots versus 2-hour dermal skin experience. You've got hair, makeup and nails all at the same time. You've got nails. You want to talk about it? We've got...
And so people are going to fly in for this place? Is there enough Victorians to visit a
It almost
4,000?
sounds like I set you up to ask that question. And I promise we haven't even spoken about the questions. So this is the vision for MECCA's flagship in Melbourne. In the way that you fly into Sydney and you do the Bondi to Bronte Walk and Bondi Beach and the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. In Melbourne, we want you to, yes, visit the tennis and yes, walk around the botanical gardens and yes, go and have an unbelievable coffee and meal down a laneway. And we want you to visit MECCA flagship, biggest beauty store in the world, redefining the definition of beauty in the services that we have and how we've moved into health and wellness. That's our dream, that we want to be on the 3 to 4 things any tourist that comes to Victoria will do.
And Australia, New Zealand today, is this exportable then? Or is it, how does this, does it just get, are Australians the only ones who see this? I was in Singapore and I was trying to buy a product for my wife and you couldn't get it in Singapore. Every time I put in MECCA, something else came up. MECCA was there, but it wasn't really there. I'd like, the way that Google works. So
Love the way Google works.
Yeah.
Do you know something? Our original vision was to be Australia's #1 beauty destination, whatever it takes. And I'm not reinventing the wheel with that. At the time, Graham Screw Turner, Screw the Rules, Flight Centre, the whatever it takes piece, that really resonated with me. Steve Jobs said it a different way. Everyone's willing to work hard. It's like, you need to work hard and then harder and then harder and then hardest of all to create the competitive space between you and others. And now, for the next 25 years, courtesy of the 3 days that we spent with Jim Collins, from good to great, our 25-year BHAG is to be the world's most loved destination. It's hard to be the world's most loved destination when you are on the other side of the world from most people. Yeah. So we have no idea how we will go internationally. We think there's huge opportunities still in Australia and New Zealand. We think that beauty, the definition of, and what we can offer customers continues to evolve and change. And then over time, how we export that, I think, will be the next kernel or the next seed that we will try and grow. And we will fail fast and fail forward lots of times.
It's exciting. So exciting.
Well, actually, that's another reason I first started talking to you, because I'm absolutely fascinated by the way in which you have taken Domino's internationally. And I would actually love to be interviewing you the other way around because I feel like you have an enormous amount to share.
I'll owe you that then.
Well, you've already actually done a brown bag lunch for our team, which continues to be one of the most popular brown bag lunches of all time because I think, again, it talks to the need for optimism and practicality combined as you work out, and lots of data and humility. From what I remember you saying when you go into other markets, never think you have the answers and never think that culture is the same everywhere. It's not.
Yeah, travel as an entrepreneur, not as the nationality that you are. Because if you put the nationality out, you've got so many blinkers on and you'll miss all of the nuances that are the 1%ers that make you successful. So, but yes. So there's some questions that I know that it's such a unique experience to sit with you that young people want to ask. Things like, do you use AI in MECCA today?
So we talk about AI a lot. And then there are certainly people within the organization that are using AI. And yes, Copilot was rolled out across everyone. I don't know, what was it, 6 months or a year ago? Not everyone. There were key
That's
people.
That's a Microsoft Copilot, is it? That
Microsoft Copilot. Yeah. And then we've got team members who show us how they have pulled together entire swathes of operating manuals and all of those sorts of things using AI. Pete, my husband,
co-founder,
co-founder.
See, when you say we too often, it's just you and Pete making these decisions when it ultimately comes to it, right? I know you've got a leadership team who do incredible work. It wouldn't be possible without an amazing leadership team. But when you make those really big calls, like a 4,000 square meter location, it's you and Pete.
You're right. We have an incredible leadership team. And you're right, we can't do it without them because I'm not doing the 4,000 square meter store. Maria is heading that up. She's been with us for 25 years from being a student, doing her double degree, having her parents cry, I think, when she said, I'm going to join this tiny company when I finish and graduate. And she's been through the entire process of being head of retail, head of store development, head of education, head of innovation. And so she's really spearheading it. She's gathered the team. And I see my role as the captain of the curling team. So they've all got the puck that they're pushing across the ice, trying to get the target. And I'm just getting very hot and sweaty, rubbing the ice in front of them to make it as smooth and quick as it needs to be. So from that perspective, it's not us. I think everybody feels the responsibility of it. But yeah, you know what? At the end of the day, sort of, if it's successful, we all can celebrate. And if it's disaster, then Pete and I really do have to take responsibility for it and recognize that we need to pivot again.
In that relationship, who makes the final decision? Husband and wife partnerships, or just any married partners in any form, who makes the final decision? It's often got to be, or do you share, okay, last time you made the decision, this time I'm making the decision? I'm
going to talk about two different
Is this controversial to ask?
It's not at all controversial to ask. And you've met Pete. Pete is an incredibly unique human being in that he is just so clever, truly has no ego, is absolutely intellectually curious. And when he joined the company full-time from having been a partner at BCG, Boston Consulting Group, 7 years in, we actually met for dinner with another married couple who are entrepreneurs, and they gave us 3 bits of advice. Sit really far apart from each other, never argue in front of the team, and there can only be one boss. So, thank you. Drove home, and I said, well, obviously I'm the boss because I've been making all the decisions for the last 7 years. And he's like, sure, no problem. And what realistically has happened is, one, I woke up about 2 years later and went, so he runs the finance and the inventory. And in retail, if you don't have any stock and don't have any money, you don't have a business. That kind of makes him by default the boss. And secondly, we have separated the business very organically into I look after anything and everything customer focused, stores, brands, comms, all of those sorts of things. And he really looks after the back end of the business, the engine room that makes it all happen. And I think we both recognize that this is a customer obsessed business. And so, yeah, I do get the final decision making on things like, let's try this concept, let's open this store. He is very good at bringing the reality of this concept's not working so well. Look. And so, he
Kit's
really
gotta
does.
go.
Yeah, basically, kit's got to go. And these sorts of things. And it's built on extraordinary mutual trust. There are two founders of a fragrance brand, and the way they would make the decision over who got to make the call. One lived in Paris, one lived in New York. They used to get onto a game of electronic football, and whoever won that game got to make the decision. So I'm saying there's very different ways to approach it.
That's fun.
I happen to think that the MECCA way may be more
sustainable.
long-term, sustainable, but they did exceptionally well with their unbelievable brands. So
probably end up focusing too much on playing the game so you can win more often.
Well, do you know what? I think there might have been a little bit of rivalry that crept in.
So here's a fun question for you. So Pete being a romantic, he's rushing you out the door, he's taking you away, and you've got to grab 3 products. What products would you grab?
Oh, thinking about Pete and where he'd be rushing me, because he loves to windsurf and I love to hike. So sunscreen is going to have to be the very first one, and that's going to have to be MECCA Cosmetica's To Save Face, because I first developed that, must be now, about 15 years ago. And that was another product that in some ways nearly broke the business because it was our first product. It took 2 years. It took way more money to develop than we had.
And it's a cosmetic sunscreen? Or is it just straight sunscreen?
No, you see, this is it. Back to the living lab of beauty. There were lots of sunscreens out there, but there were no sunscreens that basically acted as a primer, that didn't give you a white cast, that gave you that SPF 30 and now 50, that had skincare benefits in it. And a bit like MECCA in general, we wanted it all. And that was super hard. And it's the number 1 bestseller in the business. Customers love it, love it, love it, love it. So that has to be one always.
Okay.
I take that everywhere with me.
Number 2.
And I might even actually take the tinted one so that I don't have to think of a foundation there.
Okay.
Double whammy. Then I'm probably going to have to go with a Westman Atelier. Their illuminating stick, because you can use it as a blush and an eyeshadow, and it could probably work on my lips at the same time. So, because you've only given me 3, and I used these.
Jenny,
2 products.
my wife, gave me this question. This is.
If you said what 20 products could you use, I would have answered it in 3 seconds. Yeah. But you're really making me think. And then
these will be your best sellers at the end of this podcast.
Do you think? I don't know. I'm trying to say, really what I'm trying to work out now is, am I using face or am I using body? And I think I'm going to stick with face because I can always wear a muumuu, but my face is always going to be on show. I'm going to have to go Augustinus Bader's original cream moisturizer, because it really is the most powerful. Oh, that was hard. Yeah. I'm all hot and sweaty now because really I would have loved, because I would have loved to say an eyelash curler because that's so important. I would have loved to have said a tubeless mascara because, MECCA Max even, it's just like, It just makes your eyes, it just does everything. It reconstitutes the way your
Now you're
entire
cheating. Now
looks
you're adding
at.
all these others.
Yeah. And then you sort of, there's hair product that you'd have to put in
No
there.
perfume, so you can smell anyway.
Oh, well, if I'm, see, now you're just being really mean.
I suppose it leads to this is what your vanity must look like with the amount of, at home, I'm talking about your private vanity, that the amount of product that people must be encouraging you to look at, your favorites as well. What does it look like? Is it just a whole chemistry kit of play, or is there, you've got your favorites, they're my favorites, and there's just the odd product?
So I have this, I'm so lucky because I think part of the magic of MECCA is our team. And so I often go to different makeup artists and say, can you pull together the looks that you think would be amazing for me? And then they do me a face chart. And then I go home and I put them into little bags with the face chart. And so if I'm being really honest and no one's seen this, I've got these baskets and I've got the face chart and the product and I can rifle through. And that feels pretty fabulous, I've got to tell you.
It'd be a business idea. You could be selling that.
It's sort of like an old version of sort of a Filofax filing system. I don't know. Anyway, so that's pretty amazing. And yes, it's funny. I met someone at a lunch for Empower that we had the other day, and they said, oh, my niece has sent some product through for you to try. And I went, I know, I can see it right now. It's on my vanity because there are literally, next to my sink at the moment, there are 4 different brands of skincare products. And I am working through them and I'm trying them. And it becomes a little mini Olympics because I sort of compare them to each other as well as to everything in general. And the only downside to that is that often by the time I'm going to bed, I'm so exhausted that the thought of going through the 4 that I've got at the moment, I can literally see them there in front of me. It does get a lot. So there are times when I just go for the tried and tested and true products that I have been using forever. That's my holiday. That's my version of a holiday, going back to the basics, because I do try so many different products.
I bet.
I can't believe you're having this conversation with me. I'm not sure that this is really that interesting for you.
It is. No, I think it's really interesting because it also leads, I think, because I know that just looking at the women in my life, it's just they're so passionate about MECCA and the things they want to know. What does it look like behind the scenes?
That's a whole set different podcast because if I was really going to talk about product and what happens both on the product we produce and, there's 40 people here who just obsess about, our signature line products all day, every day, and the conversations we have about that versus the brands that we take on and the why and the brand architecture and the white space that has to come with them and what the technology is and how we believe in the founders and how we always meet the founders and how you have to believe in their vision because you have to, it becomes such a visceral partnership, honestly. So I could talk about that. I could talk about, how I think MECCA's role is completely different from any other operator in the world. And I say this all the time, that I think that we take the brand founder's vision and we are the lightning rod of that brand DNA direct to a customer because there is no distributor in between. There is no retailer in between. We literally straddle on the one side the brand founder and we worship at the feet of brand founders. We believe that they have just such extraordinary creativity and formulaic genius and our customer. And I'm laughing to team members and go, I think we're the only business in the world that we never, ever, ever get to be a customer to anyone because we literally see ourselves as slaves to the brands and slaves to the customer. And our job is to make everything seamless, snag-free in between. So I could talk about
this is magical for an entrepreneur because it's that constant obsession and all those 1%ers that you're adding together that makes MECCA so unique. Yeah. Because, you're competing against some of the biggest powerhouses in the world in retail, and yet you stand alone. You stand and you break out. And I think for an entrepreneur, knowing that they may start with an idea, which sometimes can even be a gimmick to some degree, and then they get in, they're knee deep in it all, and now, okay, we've got to get the gimmicks, got the door open, but now we've got to be a real business, and the evolution, and as you said, all the learning, the data, and what do you stand for, which I suppose leads to what are the values that MECCA has internally?
I'm just going to jump back to the first bit and then I'll answer that. But back to this point, and I think this is important for, startup entrepreneurs. I certainly faced enormous hurdles. And so many people in the industry said to me, maybe one store in Melbourne, maybe one store in Sydney. I just don't see how there's an audience beyond that. My parents told me recently, and it's quite emotional for me, with the new store, they went in to see, it's the old David Jones menswear store. And I have actually, you just saw it, a picture of them in their hard hats and pink MECCA neon work, safety overalls. And they said, post that visit, that when I first started talking about doing MECCA, they'd go into these department stores and these enormous beauty halls, and they were thinking to themselves, how can this ever work? How can anyone triumph in an environment where there are such enormous players who have everything going in their favor, from huge rental, huge footprints of stores, awareness, finances, everything.
But the brand's even potentially a slave to them because the access points that a brand can get with somebody like that.
But the brands themselves are all so enormous and so dominant. So I think my parents walked out 27 years later and they couldn't believe that MECCA had managed to find a niche in the market and make it a really significant niche. And actually that MECCA is now bigger than the 2 department stores and specialty retail here in Australia, all combined. And
amazing.
I think that came from this absolute obsession with the customer and what the customer wanted and changing it every step of the way. And so the key point I want to make here is, for entrepreneurs, everybody will either say no, you can't possibly do it. And then the other end of the spectrum is people who will be blindly encouraging. And it's, how do you have that middle ground of not being dispirited by people who just say it's not possible? And by the way, my parents never said a word. They would 150% supportive the whole way through. They kept their fears to themselves, which I appreciate. But then on the other side, people go, oh yes, just do it. It'll be great. Go for it. It's like, they always ask the tough questions. My parents like, what's the foot flow in that area? How many people have to come through the door? Have you thought about this? And they really were very involved. My mother did the mail order before the internet because the phone kept ringing off the hook. And she's like, somebody's got to answer it. And then someone would be saying, I would really, really love the NARS multiple. She's like, let me find out what that is and sure. So, I think that is a key point I want to make, is that people will say no. You need to say how. That's my guiding light. Now, answering your next question. Sorry, that was a big segue, but I think it's a really important one.
Yeah, I agree.
Young entrepreneurs cannot be discouraged by people saying you can't do it. Young entrepreneurs cannot be lulled into a false sense of security by people saying, go for it, it'll be amazing. It's trying to listen to the nuggets in between of what makes it hard and how do you overcome that.
Which surely led to your values that you've learned over the years, the MECCA values. And I even want to know where the name came from, but we'll get to that. The values that you work to.
So, MECCA has its purpose, i.e., why do you roll out of bed every day?
Mm-hmm.
And that is to embolden through beauty, making people look, feel, and be their best. So every day, why do you roll out of bed? Then, what's our vision? We want to be the world's most loved beauty destination. And then there are our 5 values, and they are be energetic and positive at all times, which I truly believe in. Because another way of saying that is, what is it? Laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry alone.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Mm-hmm.
nobody wants to know. Just bring the energy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that, take responsibility. I think as an entrepreneur, you need people around you who will behave like an entrepreneur as well, and who will see it as much as theirs as yours, that you are in this together. Take pride in all you are and all you do. And I think that's incredibly important, that you, nothing is ever just good enough. Okay. You always have to try and smash it out of the park, and be really proud of what you do. Then be respectful and courteous at all times, because life is too short to bring any unpleasantness into anything. You can get what you want and you can say what you need to say, but you can always be polite about it.
Yes.
And I would love to segue into a lesson I was told very early on about ego, but we'll get to that. And the last one to me, and this is the one that brings it home, we've already talked about it, and that is do whatever it takes. And that encompasses everything I talked about. I just think that to excel and to be excellent, you have to go all the way. And I have qualified that by saying we're not asking you to break the law. Not that sort of do whatever it takes. But, you have to literally, I never want to go home thinking I've left a single ounce of anything on the table. And there is always a way. There is always a way. You've just got to find it. So that's that one. And then the be respectful and courteous at all times. I think one of the greatest pieces of advice I was given as a budding entrepreneur was by one of the brand founders, who basically said, get your ego, pop it in a box, lock the box, put the box up out of reach up in the attic, and then hide the key somewhere really difficult to get to. And then never bring that ego out. Ego is the undoer of so much in business. And I think that is something, I think, to remain humble and curious at all times benefits you, the team, the business, the customers, everybody, and it allows you to contribute more broadly to the community in a really powerful way.
And beautifully led, because everything you've just said is everything I've ever experienced behind the scenes in your retail spaces. It's real.
Can I tell you, it is real. And back to this point, there are all these other things like you are what you're willing to walk past, for example. We believe so obsessively in education and contextualizing the why for our team members. We have a retail leadership conference twice a year. We get 500 people
That's
here.
Impressive in itself, by the way. A lot of companies bring it together once a year, but that's a serious investment. And in retail, the rah-rah, getting the purpose, the values, and all of the emotion in the business.
It's just
congratulations.
So
that's
critical.
Amazing.
No, but it's been part of our business model from the beginning. The amount that we put into education and engagement is 4 times the average. And it's, I'd say, probably 3 times more than anyone else.
It shows. It absolutely shows.
And I think that's it. And we believe that our people are our differentiator. They are what bring life to the whole MECCA experience. And customers, when they write to us, which they do enormously, the amount of feedback we get is actually totally disproportionate to industry averages. And they never say, oh my goodness, that blush is the most amazing blush, because it will be. But it's, I cannot tell you, I went in, I was having a rubbish day, I met Amy, Amy scooped me up. She sat me down. She made me feel like $1 million. The stories just go on and on and on. And every Monday morning, we have a Monday morning meeting with everybody in support center for half an hour, and we finish it with customer feedback, because that is actually the engine room of our business and what keeps us going. And what makes that customer experience every single time? It's our team members.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's another thing as an entrepreneur, be clear about what differentiates you. And it may not always be the obvious thing, because you'd say at MECCA, the obvious thing is our brand lineup, because it is the best brand lineup in the world. Every single person that comes to the market in beauty is blown away by MECCA's offer. So you could say that's it, and you could rest on your laurels and have that be it. But actually at MECCA, we think it is our team. So it's not the obvious. And I think that could be applied to so many businesses.
And it must be chicken and egg. You wouldn't have earned all of those partnerships if you weren't the best. Because there's so many quality businesses there that have choices of where they...
So many choices. And that's back to being the slave of the brands too. Just being an all-round worshipper of others.
And the name MECCA?
Girlfriend, London. We both worked at L'Oreal together. Godmother to her daughter. Still see each other every year. We became so close because that first experience you have working, I think it's like a crucible of fire of experience, and you've become so close with the people you work with. And I was explaining this concept, and I was like, I want it to be the place that people will come to. I want it to be the epicenter of a new way of experiencing cosmetics. I want people to beat a path to the door. And she went, you want it to be the Mecca of cosmetics? I'm like, yes, I want it to be the Mecca of cosmetics. And she said, MECCA Cosmetica. And I went, yeah, that's genius. You're genius. And so that became the name. And, we haven't really spoken about this, but one of the values in life, and it doesn't have to be written out in what your company values are, but you are the company you keep. And having people around you who are extraordinary and exceptional, and having that as a resource with the generosity of spirit that they have and the curiosity that you can bring, that can lead to real magic.
Yeah. And I guess one of my last questions is walking in your shoes, because entrepreneurs, they're going to be admiring you from what they're seeing today. So what does your daily schedule look like, as an example?
I'm going to go back. So with entrepreneurs who are listening, I really don't want them to get the sense that admiration is the thing, or that I hop, skip and jump through all of it. We continue to make deep and profound mistakes as we go. And, the most recent, we had a warehouse management system issue that really did become an existential crisis for the business. And, it sat at my and Pete's door that we hadn't put enough emphasis on it, that we as leaders hadn't given it enough airtime. And, it caused huge issues for so many people in this business and our partners. And we really had to apologize to everybody that we got it so wrong. And these sorts of things are a real reminder that not only do things go wrong, but you get things wrong. So I think if you want to admire anything about me or MECCA, it would have to be my optimism in the face of the many mistakes I make, that we make, and that's okay. So I don't want to give anyone the idea that it's all rainbows, unicorns, and we just tap dance from one lily pad to another. We don't. So that would be.
But you also took responsibility. That's what you're saying. That's.
You have to, right? Yeah. You have to.
Some people can't. It's somebody else's fault. We got the wrong software.
So what does my day look like? They're so varied, but the first thing I do is, I'm in this for the long haul, right? So I got to look after me. And to look after me, there's just two things. There's sort of health and happiness. Health, so I get up, and I exercise, do yoga 3 times a week. I do personal training twice a week. I do a lot of walking meetings first thing in the morning, an hour around the tan. One of those things will happen every single day. And then I will always sing in the shower because I've read the book Project Happiness by Gretchen. I've forgotten her last name, but we'll come back to it. And, music in your life is incredibly important. So I literally have it on full ball every day. Then I will meditate at some point during the day, but if I have a big meeting in the office, we have meditation pods in here, and I will go off for 20 minutes before like a 3-hour meeting. So if I've got it going on during the day, then I won't do it in the morning. I do love doing it in the morning, but so that will happen. Then if I'm in Richmond, I'll come into support centre. I'm a massive believer in all being together. I think that there is nothing that builds a community as strongly as being together, sharing ideas. And I talk about it being the cement between the bricks. We're all these bricks, but actually it's the community of being together that makes all the difference. So I am at the opposite end of a working from home advocate for the individuals and for the culture. So I will be here all day, every day. And I spend a lot of times in meetings, honestly. I try and make them worthwhile. So I try and make the meetings much more creative brainstorming. I'm really not great just going through a deck. The most powerful meetings for me is something that, again, I got from Steve Jobs. He 3 hours a week he would spend just whoever he wanted with on marketing and 3 hours on product development. And so that's the model I've tried to take. And we used to do it every Thursday morning, 9 till 12. And that's the model that I try and bring to everything that we do. And then I'll try and do walking meetings during the day, I'll meet with brands, Zoom meetings, education, whatever's going on. And then at the end of the day, home, family, always sit down for dinner. And my kids try and say to me, we're the only family that sits down to dinner every night. I'm like, well, that's so funny you say that because I've spoken to so and 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 so, and they do too. So
the jury for the kids.
Yeah. But it's incredibly important. My parents are exceptionally important, so they join at least twice a week. Wow, so breaking of bread, I'm obsessed with that. And then I will go for a walk with Pete around the tan. We used to do it with the best dog in the world. Best dog in the world's gone to dog heaven. So now we've continued that and we flesh out a lot on those meetings. That's what I'm here. But I spend a huge amount of time traveling, seeing brands, looking at new things, meeting people, looking at retail concepts, visiting the stores. I think it's incredibly important to be here and to work with everybody on how we're driving things forward. But you have to bring what's going on out there and you have to sort of put that through, some sort of crucible and work out how to make our business contextually make sense in the broader global arena. Plus, how do we stay absolutely ahead of what everybody else is doing? And I think MECCA's this beautiful mix of we live in a bubble and we stay in a bubble, and our bubble is about exactly where are we going and how are we customer obsessed and how, therefore, do we have the capacity to be very different? But then how do we make sure that anything that's going on internationally, that we stay ahead of it? All of this. I feel like I'm just talking.
We could keep going for hours. Your enthusiasm and your passion is so contagious. So how important is that early start at L'Oreal? And did you always know you wanted to be in cosmetics?
I didn't always know I wanted to be in cosmetics. I was fascinated by cosmetics, probably in a different way, John Berger's Ways of Seeing, which is a book I studied when I was studying communications in Boston. And it was how the industry defined beauty, and I felt that self-expression needed to play a much bigger part. And so I thought that was all really, really interesting. But when I left Boston, I applied for roles, and L'Oreal was the only beauty company I applied for because I was really interested in communications. And they were the biggest beauty company in the world. And I felt, again, probably totally delusional, but that there was a different way in which to communicate to consumers. And it was that combined with who I met in the interview process. And I met the person who was the most senior in an operational role in L'Oreal, was the most senior woman in an operational role at L'Oreal at the time. She was general manager of the UK. And I was like, I want to hitch my wagon to this horse. I think I can learn an enormous amount from her. And so I applied to non-beauty companies, and I would have gone to a non-beauty company had it been the most profound learning opportunity with the most powerfully influential boss that I would have had. So back to you are the company you keep. So that's how I got to L'Oreal. How important was L'Oreal? Do you know, L'Oreal is a really tough company. They have very high expectations. You work exceptionally hard. They treat you like an entrepreneur. They treat you like an owner of your area, and you do have a lot of responsibility. At the same time, they will turn and change strategic direction, tactical approaches on the turn of a dime if it's right. And a lot of people found that tough. A lot of people probably still find that approach tough. I think that it was the most powerful, valuable on-ramping to being an entrepreneur, on-ramping to being successful in any approach to business. And I genuinely think of JFK's words all the time. Ask not what, your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. I think that should be your mentality going into any workforce, doing anything, anywhere, because the more you put in is how much you will get out. And that needs to be your attitude through all of life, I think, to go into anything entrepreneurial. You can never expect the world to deliver. You cannot expect your job to, your work environment to deliver. You have to go out and just mine it all, absorb it all, and make it as tough as you can possibly bear, because guess what? If you want to go into an entrepreneurial environment, some moments are going to be tough, so you might as well get match fit. And so I'm exceptionally grateful to L'Oreal and to anyone who has the opportunity to work in a tough environment. I'd say go for it. I think L'Oreal was very important to my ability to go forward and take full responsibility for every outcome, for everything that was everything was thrown my way, and that every outcome was up to me.
You spoke to our team once, and you talked about the way that you went about winning a partnership, and I think it's really shows and illustrates the energy that you go through. I mean, to me, I was sitting back going, "That's unbelievable." Can you tell that story?
I can tell that story. There are really quite a few like that. So I can tell you a different story. I can tell you about Charlotte Tilbury, extraordinary brand, now number one brand in Australia. And it started 10 years ago. Charlotte Tilbury, the founder, with the incredible businesswoman and visionary, and her CEO, who's same, super smarts, and collectively they've driven the business phenomenally well. We saw them before the brand launched. We continued to travel to wherever they were, whether that was England, whether that was America, whenever they were there, to go and see them. We would pitch differently every single time. We would come to them with, this is what the windows would look like, this is what the campaigns would look like, this is the customer, this is how we would treat it, this is what we would do with it. Every single time they would go, we're not ready, we're not ready, we're not ready. There was a time in New York where I threw my back out so badly getting out of the shower, I could not move. During COVID, they were all back to, isn't life fabulous? And they were on holiday in the middle of the Atlantic somewhere. And we waited for 2 hours with the screen going like that until 12:30 at night, until 2 a.m. to pitch the latest Windows campaign, what we'd do, how we'd do it. They came to visit here. We turned the whole support centre into welcome. This is what MECCA and Charlotte Tilbury would look like. We got the 1,000 people at our retail conference and support centre to do a Charlotte, we love you. We want you. Come to MECCA in a video that we sent her. I cannot tell you. Every year we would send a bottle of champagne with balloons of Australian kangaroos, everything saying, we're waiting. I could go on and on and on with what we did to get that brand. So that's just one example. And that was 7
whatever it takes.
Years of doing whatever it takes.
Wow. Well, congratulations, Jo. It's an absolute inspiration every time I spend time with you. And it just seems like I can go on and on and on. There's just so many nuggets of gold. So, yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing all your stories that hopefully inspire many young people.
It's been such a pleasure, as I said, and it's wonderful to recount. You have focused on lots of the gold. I just want you to tell you there's lots of lumps of coal in there as well. So I just want to make sure I reiterate that. And I don't know who's going to interview you, but you need to tell all of your stories, because certainly that has been incredibly inspiring to us at MECCA, and you have helped us on our journey, and we're incredibly grateful to you. So thank you. And I think this is a genius idea, and I wish this had been around when I'd started.
Thank you, Jo. Amazing.
Thank you.